Her name was Nira Akash, and she had been watching since the beginning. She was beautiful in the precise, calculated way of someone who had studied beauty as a discipline: pale gold skin, black hair cut to a sharp edge at her jaw, eyes like new copper, and a smile she wore the way a sword wears its sheath. She was a historian, a scholar of divine cults, and she had been excavating the eastern edge of the Kalath for 2 years, cataloging every shard and fragment of the Azara temples, building the academic reputation that would, she was certain, make her name permanent. She had found the first signs of the bond in her research before she ever saw Eli's changed eyes. The scrolls had been clear. A mated goddess left traces in the world, small ones at first, sand that moved in patterns without wind, scorpions that gathered near a specific location, the quality of silence in a place that had been touched. She had followed the signs the way a hunter follows tracks, and she had arrived at her camp on the 3rd month with a letter of professional introduction and a smile like a drawn blade. She told herself it was about the research. About the once-in-a-generation discovery, a real goddess, living, bonded, present. The publication this would generate. The legacy. She told herself this even as she watched the way she talked about her, Azara, always Azara, with a softness that made Nira's throat tighten with something she refused to name as jealousy. She had never been loved like that. She had never let herself need it. But Nira was not a villain of simple wants. She genuinely believed what she told her, over weeks of conversation, over shared dinners at the camp table while the desert darkened around them. She will consume you, Eli. This is what the texts say. She is a goddess of venom and patient death. She doesn't love, she possesses. Everything that enters her orbit becomes her territory. You think what you feel is mutual, but you are only human. You cannot feel what she actually is. She said it gently. She said it with the look of someone who hates bearing bad news. And she was not entirely wrong, which was what made her dangerous. Azara had consumed empires. She had watched men build their whole lives around her, emptying themselves in devotion until there was nothing left. She had never meant to. But she had been unable to prevent it, because the gravity of a goddess is not a thing that can be fully switched off. Eli brought these words to her on a night when the moon was full and ordinary, and she didn't accuse, she asked. With her full, still attention. Is that what you're doing? She had no human words for the feeling that passed through her then. It was ancient and it was made of all 3 centuries and the priests and the empty temples and the night she had pressed herself against the divine veil and watched her sleep in her tent before she ever let herself be seen. I do not know, she said, and it was the most honest thing a goddess had ever said. I do, she said. She reached up and touched her face, not flinching from her gold eyes, not flinching from what she was. You make me more, Azara. Not less. You don't take up all the space. You make the space bigger. She paused. That's not consumption. That's what love actually does. She felt the bond pulse between them. Felt her immortality shiver. She turned to look east, toward Nira's lights. She fears what she cannot measure, she said. She wants to study me. I know. Her jaw was set. I told her to leave. She won't. No. A pause. She believes what she's saying. That's the difficult part. Azara was quiet for a moment. Then, slowly, she uncoiled from her seated position and rose to her full height, her tail arcing above her in the blue night. Then I will speak to her myself, she said. Nira did not run when Azara came to her tent. She would grant her that, whatever else she was, Nira Akash was not afraid. She stood outside her tent in the pre-dawn dark with her notes clutched to her chest and her copper eyes wide but her chin level, and she looked at the goddess the way she looked at everything she studied, with a hunger to understand. You came, Nira said. You expected it. I hoped. She swallowed. I've spent 2 years learning everything about you. Every fragment. Every prayer, every description, every account of what you look like and how you move and what the priest said you wanted. Her voice was under careful control but her hands were shaking. And now you're here. And she stopped. The notes dropped to her side. For just a moment, Nira Akash looked very young and very undone. You're real. Azara regarded her. Everything you have said to her, she said, you said because you are afraid of what you cannot own. Nira flinched. You cannot publish me, Azara continued, and her voice was not cruel, it was the desert, honest, indifferent to comfort, and ultimately generous to those who respected it. You cannot have me in your collection. You cannot make your name from my existence without my consent. And you cannot take her from me because you are lonely and she is kind, and that is a thing you have mistaken for a door. Silence. The stars were leaning in. I'm lonely, Nira said, very quietly. I know. Azara paused. So was I. For 300 years. She looked at the woman before her, this brilliant, armored, frightened woman who had spent her whole career surrounding herself with the remains of worship so she didn't have to notice she was never the one being held. What you want from her, you should ask for it plainly. Not by subtraction. Nira made a sound that wasn't quite crying. The notes fell into the sand. She loves you, she said. Her voice cracked only once. Whatever I thought, she genuinely loves you. Yes. Then what am I supposed to do with all of this? A gesture to the camp, the research, the 2 years. Study me, Azara said. With permission. Write the truth about the temples and the priests and what they built. Make your name from what is, not from what you feared I was. A pause. There is more than enough of me to go around. I have been invisible for 300 years. I would not mind being known. Nira looked up at her. Why would you offer me that? Azara considered for a moment. The scorpion tail dipped and rose. Because you reminded me of something I'd almost let myself forget, she said. That loneliness is not weakness. It is just hunger that has not yet found its meal. She turned to go, then paused, and because any woman who spent 2 years learning every fragment of me and still had the courage to stand here while I spoke to her directly, that is not nothing. The sun was beginning to thread the edge of the horizon. Nira stood in the pink light for a long time after the goddess had gone. Then she sat down in the sand, opened her notebook to a fresh page, and wrote at the top. Day 1. She let me look. The night of the next blue moon, they stood together on the highest dune of the Kaleth. It had been a year. Eli was the same steady eyes, same quiet attention, the same scar on her left forearm. But there was something in her that was different too, a quality of settledness that hadn't been there before, the look of a woman who has been received completely and has stopped bracing for the moment when that changes. Azara felt it in her bones, the slight, truthful thinning at the outermost edges of her immortality, as fine as a single thread, as irreversible as the tide. She had bound herself to a mortal. She was glad. Are you afraid? She asked. She was watching the moon rise, vast and blue-tinged, close to Antares, the heart of the scorpion burning red and nearby like a witness. Of what? She said. Of what comes. For you. Because of me. She was quiet for a moment. The desert breathed around them. I spent 300 years being immortal and alone, she said. Which is to say, I spent 300 years being safe. She turned to look at her, this human woman with her compass and her steady hands and her way of holding the world in her attention until it felt held. Safe is not the same as living. She turned from the moon to look at her. You're sure? I am a goddess, she said, and the gold of her eyes deepened with something ancient and certain and utterly unhesitating. I am not often wrong. She laughed, the rare, real kind that reached her eyes, and she felt it in the bond-like warm light, and she thought, this is what the priests could never have given me, what the temples couldn't hold, not worship, not awe, but this. A woman who laughs beside me. Who stands close enough to be changed by me? Who chose me knowing the cost? She reached out and took her hand. The blue moon climbed. The scorpions in the desert below turned all at once, 1,000 small pale creatures pointing east, and a sound rose from the sand that was not quite music and not quite prayer but somewhere between the two, the sound of an ancient thing being welcomed home. Not worshipped. Loved. Azara Kett, she said. Eli Voss, she said back. The veil between the worlds was thin tonight. Both of them were on the same side of it. And the desert remembered. It always remembered. It remembered this best of all. The end.